Christmas nights had that stillness that tricks you into believing everything is safe. Laughter from the dining room drifted down the hall, muffled by the hum of the bathroom fan. Steam blurred my reflection in the mirror as I wiped the patch clean with my hand. The phone buzzed once, then stopped. I almost ignored it, an unknown number flashing on the screen. But when it lit up again, something in my chest told me to answer. "Hello," I said. A man's voice came through, flat, urgent, the kind that doesn't waste time. "Richard, you need to get home. Now." The way he said it short. Tide wasn't the tone of a prank or a mistake. "Who is this?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You've got 10 minutes. That's all that separates you from what's coming." The line clicked dead, leaving only the hiss of running water. I stood there, towel half folded, pulse like a drum under my jaw. Through the cracked door, I could still hear the comfort of normal life. Plates clinking. Someone laughing about the same story they told every year. My son checked his watch, pretending he wasn't counting time. I stepped into the room, forcing calm into my voice. "I need to head back to the house," I said. "Something might be off, alarm pipe. Maybe the power." The words were excuses dressed as logic. Concern flashed too late across faces that had already decided to let me go. I grabbed my coat, cold hit, like a slap when I stepped outside. Sharp, alive, almost cleansing. The night was so quiet I could hear tires whispering on the distant road. My phone buzzed again. Same number. "Police are at least 10 minutes out," the voice said. "Don't use the front door. Left side. Basement window. Glass will be in the shrubs." Then silence again. I looked at the phone, at the street, at the empty shape of my own house in the dark. The drive took 6 minutes, maybe less. I didn't pull into the driveway. Instead, I parked one house down behind a half-dead tree and killed the lights. My breath fogged the windshield as I stared at the front windows of my home. Familiar shapes turned foreign. I moved quickly, cutting across the yard. The grass brittled under my shoes. The basement window was cracked. The glass splintered just like he'd said. Moonlight caught the tiny shards resting in the leaves. I crouched, touched one, felt its clean edge bite against my glove. Fresh. My phone vibrated. Another text. "Don't announce yourself. If they're inside, call 911 now." I dropped to my knees, peering through the small broken pane. The basement was a low rectangle of shadows. A single weak bulb flickered over the workbench. Nothing moved. I dialed 911 and whispered, "There's been a break-in. My address is... I'm outside." "No, I haven't gone in." The dispatcher told me to stay put, but staying still while someone might be inside your life feels impossible. I hung up before I could change my mind. The voice on the phone had said not to use the front. He never said anything about the back. And just like that, I was moving again into the dark, toward the unknown, where answers waited behind glass and silence. What waited beyond that door wasn't theft. It was a truth that had been picking my locks for years. Richard was about to find out the difference between someone breaking in and someone already inside. The back deck groaned under my weight, boards dry from the winter air. I moved slow, each step measured to keep the house from noticing me. The kitchen door stood still under a yellow bulb that hummed like a fly. No broken glass. The lock looked untouched, ordinary, smug. I reached under the mat. No key. I hadn't left one there in years. Habits die slow, though that old reflex of checking anyway told me something about fear. It makes you rehearse every mistake you've ever corrected. I eased the storm door, opened an inch. The kitchen door gave beneath my palm, unlocked. Relief and dread hit at once. Twin waves crashing in the chest. I stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and old dust hung in the air, like the ghosts of normal life still lingering. My shoes came off in silence. The tile was cold under my socks. I took the tire iron from the umbrella stand and held it low. Not like the movies. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears, louder than any creak. Room by room, I checked. Living room, office, hallway. Every inch of the place felt slightly wrong. The throw pillows were crooked. A drawer sat open half an inch. In the office, a binder hung halfway out of the file cabinet, red tab flashing under the desk lamp like a warning. I crouched, saw the word estate scribbled across it. My late wife's name had been there once, printed neat on every page she ever filed. I pushed it back without looking inside. If I looked, I'd stop breathing. The quiet inside my house was too neat, too designed. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from the same unknown number. Police are 3 minutes out. Don't touch the mat under your chair. My pulse jumped. I stared at the little braided mat under the desk, the one where the chair wheels had left grooves. I bent down, lifted the corner with 2 fingers. An envelope waited underneath, sealed tight, thick paper like something from another decade. Someone had been here long enough to hide it, and careful enough to cover their tracks. I set the envelope back, slower than I picked it up. That's when I heard it. A sound too light to be anything mechanical. Fabric brushing wood. It came from below, near the vent in the floor. The crawl space connected to the basement. I froze. The vent whispered again. Air, disturbed by something human. I moved toward the basement door, careful not to let the boards talk. The door's paint was cold under my ear when I pressed it there. I listened, shallow breathing, like someone trying to remember how quiet sounds. My mouth went dry. I flicked the hallway light on, off, on again. An old code my wife and I used, a kind of private question. Are you awake? No answer but a shuffle. Police are coming, I said. You're in my house. You don't want to be here when they arrive." The stillness that followed was heavier than silence. Then movement. Toward the stairs, not away. I backed up a step. When I turned the knob, the door creaked open like it was bracing for what waited below. Cold air rushed up, thick with dust and earth. The basement was a mouth, breathing slow, and in its throat something moved. Richard thought he was hunting an intruder. He hadn't realized yet the intruder had chosen him. What was waiting below wasn't looking for money. It was looking for proof. The air from the basement was thick, damp, and still carried the scent of old soil. I held a tire iron close to my thigh and stepped down one creaking board at a time. Each footfall measured like a countdown. A flickering bulb threw weak light across the concrete floor. Every surface seemed to need the boxers stacked straight, the sawhorses lined like soldiers, the workbench clean. And then the noise again, a faint whisper of fabric against wood. My eyes tracked the far corner where the furnace pipe made a blind spot. There, a movement. A shape detached itself from shadow and rose. The instinct to speak fought with the instinct to swing. I said one word. Stop. The figure lunged instead, fast and low, shoulder first, like a man breaking through a line. The swing wasn't thought, it was muscle and fear. The iron connected with a thud that rang up my arms and left the air too quiet to trust. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The sound, the air, even the house seemed to hold still to see who'd win. Then a groan, low and human, from the floor. I backed up, eyes locked on the dark patch near the furnace. "Don't move," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. But the shadow didn't listen. It rolled sideways, quick, into the hollow under the stairs. I caught a flash of glove, a glint of metal. Something small flew at my face. A pellet or powder burst. My eyes burned instantly. The air turned to acid. I stumbled back, coughing. By the time I could see again, the figure was gone through the cracked basement window, glass crunching like ice as he pushed into the night. I ran 2 steps and stopped. Outside, a car engine revved once, then faded into the distance. Not police. Too smooth. I coughed, tried to catch my breath. My hands shook. On the floor near the workbench, something small and round glinted under the light. I bent down. A tiny black dome cracked. A micro camera, the kind you clip to a hat brim or a pocket. Someone had been recording. The sirens were close now, Doppler wailing through the cold. I went upstairs, set the tire iron back in its stand, and washed my eyes at the sink until the sting dulled. When the knock came, 3 femmes rapsai already knew it was the police. 2 of them. One older, eyes sharp and tired. The other younger, still trying to remember what confidence feels like. I told them everything: the call, the shadow, the glass, the binder. They moved through the rooms, methodical and quiet. The older one found a broken glass. "Single strike," he murmured. "Gloved prints." The younger checked the rooms. "No electronics taken. he said. No smash and grab. The older nodded. They wanted something specific. I looked toward the office, toward the file cabinet I hadn't wanted to open. Yeah, I said. Paper. They bagged the broken camera. The envelope under the mat, took photos of the binder. The older cop asked, You sure this wasn't like that before? I shook my head. My mouth sighed no. My mind said, not until tonight. They left me standing in a house that suddenly didn't feel like mine. The lights hummed. Every shadow looked rehearsed. My phone buzzed on. Heard sirens. Near your block. You good, Dad. Then another. Want me to come by. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I typed 2 words. Police here. Then I erased I'm fine because I wasn't. The quiet after the door closed was worse than the break-in. It was the quiet of something that had already entered. Not through the window, but through trust. I looked around my living room, everything in its place. Nothing in its place. The bowl by the counter sat slightly off-center. The spare fob resting inside. A gray smudge on the rim like a ring had touched it. I imagined the hand. Familiar, careful, confident. A hand that knew exactly how far to move something without making it look moved at all. Richard thought the night's danger ended when the sirens arrived, but the real trespass had already begun. Sometimes the person who breaks into your home isn't after what you own there, after what you know. The police left the house quieter than they found it. Even the furnace hum seemed nervous now, like it had been caught listening. I wandered the rooms with my phone still in my hand, rereading the last message from my son before locking the screen. The word Dad stared back at me like it was rehearsed. The kitchen light buzzed low, painting long shadows across the floor. The bowl with my spare fob sat where it shouldn't, half an inch off-center, a gray smudge still fresh on its rim. I remembered the way my son's fingers brushed that same bowl last week when he dropped by. Watch flashing in the kitchen glow, asking if I'd thought about updating the locks. Back then it felt like conversation. Now it felt like inventory. The house wasn't home tonight. It was evidence. Every small thing told a different version of me. And I wasn't sure which one was still true. I thought about sleep. But sleep in a place that had already been opened felt like a performance I couldn't pull off. Then the phone rang again. Unknown number. The same voice. Calm and precise, as if he'd been waiting for me to answer. Don't use the front, he said. Same tone as before. And don't tell your son you're alone. His words dropped into the dark like small stones, making ripples in everything they touched. Who are you? I asked, but he ignored the question. The binder they pulled had a red tab, he continued. They didn't find the envelope under the mat, did they? My throat went tight. You were inside my house, I said. He didn't deny it. After them, he replied. Not before. I'm not your problem, Richard. He paused, his voice softening just enough to sound human. You're being cornered by someone who knows your basement as well as you do. I wanted to believe he was lying, that this was all some twisted game. But he spoke with the kind of confidence only someone who's been inside your walls could have. "You saw him?" I asked. "I saw his wrist," he said. "A black watch, silver notch, at 12. Hands that don't do work, only point at it." My heart thudded. Once heavy and final. That same watch had been at my dinner table hours earlier. "Say his name," I said. Silence stretched in on the line, almost polite. Then he said, "You already know. You just don't want to yet." The call ended with a soft click. I stood in the kitchen, listening to my own breath. The air seemed to hum with his words. "Don't tell your son you're alone." I stared at the phone for a long time, wanting to call back, wanting to unhear everything. Headlights drifted past the window. A patrol car making its slow promise to protect. The magnet on my fridge caught my eye. "Do the next right thing." It was something my late wife used to say whenever life cornered me. I pressed the magnet flat against the case card the officers had left, as if keeping the two together could make sense of the chaos. The unknown voice wasn't done. I could feel it. Whoever he wasn't warning me for free. The question wasn't what he wanted it, was how much of my life he already owned. Richard didn't know which scared him more. The man who broke in, or the one who warned him how. Because sometimes, the voice trying to save you already has a key to your door. Morning arrived dull and metallic, like light passing through dirty glass. Richard stood by the window with coffee he hadn't touched, watching the patrol car roll by twice in the same slow loop. The sound of its tires on the frostbitten street reminded him that safety was more of a gesture than a fact. On the counter, his phone buzzed again. Not the unknown number this time, but a message from Lena. "Pyron later. Kids want to show you what they made." He opened the picture she'd sent. 2 paper snowflakes. One uneven, the other almost perfect, held up by smiling hands that didn't know what danger looked like. In the background, something small and ordinary froze him. A ceramic apple-shaped bowl on their counter. A bowl filled with keys. Among them, a familiar black fob, its rubber sleeve worn at the same edge as his. He zoomed in until the pixels turned cruel. It was identical. No, it was his. The room seemed to tilt. He called. She answered on the first ring, her voice cheerful, unaware. "You got the picture. Aren't they ridiculous?" "They're perfect," he said. "What's the apple bowl for?" She laughed. "It's the dump zone. Keys, coins, whatever ends up there." His next words came too soft. "Is my fob visiting?" There was a pause long enough to turn the air sharp. "What?" she asked. "In the bowl," he said. "There's a black fob, rubber sleeve. Looks like mine." Her tone shifted. "Evan has a few, Richard. Everyone does." Don't start spinning. But her voice was thinner now, like she'd stepped back from whatever she didn't want to see. Is he home? He asked. He ran to the bakery, she said. We'll see you later. Pie and peace, remember. The call ended before he could decide which word hurt more. Peace or later. He stood there listening to the empty dial tone, every second louder than the one before. He wanted to throw the phone, to run, to not care. But his wife's old words echoed from some quiet corner of memory. Loud love is sometimes a sale. He set the mug down and grabbed his coat. Outside, the cold didn't bite. It carved. His car engine coughed to life, and for the first time in months, he drove without knowing where the road would end. The only plan was to find the truth before it found him again. He stopped at the HOA office, the one the unknown voice had mentioned. The building still smelled like stale vape and printer ink. A woman with wrist-shaped earrings greeted him with a polite smile that had seen too many complaints and not enough thanks. Morning, Richard. Need a form? She asked. Not a form. He said, setting his police case number on the desk. Camera footage. Maple and 3rd. Between 6 and 8 last night. Her smile faltered. We usually have to submit a request to the safety subcommittee, she began. They meet Thursday. He leaned forward just enough. Then you and I can pretend it's Thursday. The woman stared at him for a long second, then sighed, muttering, You didn't hear this from me. Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard. Muscle memory, betraying discretion. On the screen, rows of camera feeds appeared, grainy and gray. Scroll to 7, Richard said. She did. Wait. Go back. There. A white SUV slid into frame, idling near his street corner. At 7:31, a hooded figure crossed the sidewalk. Shoulders tight, pace quick, head down. The SUV's brake lights flickered once. 4 minutes later, the figure returned, slipped inside, and the car rolled away without headlights. Can you zoom in? He asked. She clicked once, twice. The image froze, and in one frame, the hood caught the wind, revealing a jawline too familiar to miss. On the wrist, a black watch, silver notch gleaming at 12. Richard didn't need to see the face. The watch was enough. Because sometimes the timepiece that tells you when to leave also tells you who's lying when they say they love you. The grainy image stared back at Richard like a mirror he didn't ask for. The woman behind the desk, Kathy, her badge said, squinted at the screen and asked, You know him? He didn't answer right away. I know the watch, he said finally, voice calm but hollow. Kathy hesitated, then printed the stills, cutting them cleanly from the page with the care of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Do you want me to send these to the board? She asked, testing him. Not yet, Richard said. Just make me a copy. She nodded, sliding the stills into an envelope. You'll sign something later to make it official. Of course, he said, forcing a tired smile. When he stepped back into the daylight, everything looked different. The cold air felt sharper, the world flatter, the kind of morning where truth hid under frost. He sat in his car and stared at the envelope in his hand. The image inside wasn't proof yet, but it was a start. He texted the unknown number, got it. SUV. Watch confirm. No reply. For the first time, he felt the silence answer him back. At 10, Richard drove to his son's house. The driveway held the same white SUV from the footage. Clean, quiet, unapologetic. He almost turned around, but then the door opened. Lena stood there, her smile tired, flour dusting her hands. "You came early," she said. "The kids have been waiting." Their laughter drifted from the living room. It almost disarmed him. Evan walked in from the garage, holding a bakery box, and that same effortless warmth he'd always worn when the world was watching. "Dad," he said. The word smooth. "Practiced? Good timing, we just grabbed cinnamon rolls. I've been thinking, you should let me check your smart lock system. Burglaries can spoof codes, and I can patch it for you." Richard stared at the black watch flashing on his son's wrist. "You want to fix it?" he said. "Just to make sure you're safe," Evan replied. His tone was soft, fatherly in the wrong direction. Lena poured coffee, glancing between them, catching the invisible weight in the air. They sat around the table like it was any other morning. The kids laughed, the roll steamed, the smell of sugar tried to bury everything ugly. Richard waited for the right silence. Then he said, "There's a camera at Maple and 3rd. HOA caught a white SUV last night. Who did figure? Watch looked a lot like yours." Evan's smile didn't falter. "Lots of watches look like mine," he said. He sliced a roll cleanly in half. "You're rattled. Don't start seeing ghosts." Richard leaned back, watching his sons, eyes steady, rehearsed. Unflinching, Lena's hand tightened around her cup. Wayne, sitting nearby, cleared his throat like an echo of caution. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle," he said. "Family first. Always." Richard looked down at his own trembling hands and realized the hardest part wasn't believing his son might lie, it was how easily he could still sound like the boy who'd once trusted him completely. The clock on the wall ticked too loud, every second cutting through the smell of coffee and cinnamon like a metronome of guilt. Richard had found the proof, but proof without confession is just noise. The next lie wouldn't come from a stranger, it would come from across the table. Evan's voice slid across the room like a calm wind trying to erase footprints. "Dad," he said gently, "you've had a rough night. We're all tired. Let's not jump to things that can't be undone." He placed his fork down precisely, a gesture rehearsed to look humble. Richa studied him, the clean nails, the easy composure, the watch that caught light like it was proud to be seen. "You said you'd fix the lock. Richard replied slowly. But you were already fixing it last night, weren't you? Evan laughed quiet. Deliberate. Disarming. Logs, mix, up times. These systems aren't perfect. Richard reached into his pocket, thumbed open his phone, and placed it face down on the table. Then let's see, he said. If it's a glitch, it'll tell us. The table fell into stillness that felt like a held breath. Richard opened the Lux log, scrolling until the digital list filled the screen. Front door unlocked. 7:27 p.m. user. Key fob. Front door locked. 7:44 p.m. user. Manual. He turned the screen toward his son. You said you were here, he whispered. But at that time, someone with my fob opened my door. Lena's fork paused mid. Wayne and Mara exchanged glances, their polite silence bending under tension. Evan kept his face still, only his eyes shifting to the side for a fraction of a second before he smiled again. Dad, he said, those logs sync to the cloud. The police might have opened it. Maybe the signal lagged. You're reading ghosts in code. Police didn't arrive till 7:50, Richard said, voice steady. And you weren't home when I found the glass. Evan leaned back, exhaling slowly, his calm beginning to sound like a weapon. You've always had a way of turning worry into fact, he said softly. Maybe this is just that again. Lena's hand trembled slightly against her cup. Evan, she said carefully, if it's a mistake, then prove it. Just show him. He didn't look at her. I will, he said. I'll call the manufacturer, get the logs checked. He reached for Richard's phone. Richard stopped him halfway. No, he said, voice cutting through the air like a blade. You won't touch it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Even the children's voices from the next room dimmed like the house itself was waiting for a verdict. Evan's expression cracked for a second. Something dark and quick flashed behind the calm. Then the smile returned. Repaired. Too careful. You know, he said softly, you're tired. You should rest. I'll stop by tonight. Bring a locksmith. We'll reset everything. Richard pushed his chair back and stood, the sound of the legs scraping across the floor slicing through the air. No need, he said. I already changed the passwords. The words landed heavy. Wayne looked up sharply. That's not a wise idea, he said. Family should handle family. Richard turned toward him, his face unreadable. Family should handle truth first. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was pressure. He thanked Lena for the coffee, nodded once to the table, and left before anyone could find words to stop him. Outside, the winter light felt cleaner than the air inside. The truth had started cracking the walls, and all that was left now was to see which side would hold when it finally fell apart. Richard had walked away from the table, but the game didn't end it, only changed rooms. The next time his phone rang, it wouldn't be a warning, it would be a test. The drive back felt endless, even though it was only 12 minutes. The air inside the car had the stillness of someone listening. Every streetlight that passed flickered like a thought he didn't want to have. When Richard pulled into his street, he didn't go straight home. He parked one house away, behind the crepe myrtle, the same spot. From that first night, the house looked asleep, curtains drawn light slow, but the quiet didn't fool him anymore. He walked slow, careful, as though stepping into his own shadow. Once inside, the familiar scent of cinnamon and dust hit him like a warning that had been left too long. He checked the windows, the locks, the sensors, everything in place, everything wrong. His phone buzzed a text from the unknown number. Change passwords. Two-factor everything. He'll try again soon. Then another message followed. He'll ask to log in on his phone. Don't. Richard stared at the screen. The air in his chest tightened. Whoever this was, they knew things before they happened. He wasn't sure anymore if that meant ally or architect. Still, he obeyed. He sat at his desk and opened every account that mattered: bank, utilities, insurance, changing passwords one by one. The process was mechanical, almost prayer-like. He wrote each new code on paper, not trusting any device that could hum behind his back. The night thickened outside, shadows settling in layers. Then the phone vibrated again, this time. A bank alert. Unusual activity detected. Password reset requested. A second message followed instantly. Transfer attempt blocked. If this wasn't you, contact us immediately. His stomach sank. He called the number on the card instead of replying to the text. The line clicked after 2 rings. Security. A calm voice said. She asked questions only he could answer, and he did, methodically, until she said, "We stopped 3 attempts. 1 password reset. 1 login. $1 test transfer." "What time?" he asked. "Between 7:48 and 7:56. He closed his eyes. Right after he left, the cold realization slid through him like a knife. Whoever had been inside his bank had used information from the inside of his home. "Freeze everything," he said quietly. "All accounts, all cards." She did. When the call ended, the silence felt almost triumphant, like he'd beaten something invisible by naming it. But victory was short. The next morning, the world crept back, pretending to be normal. He made tea he didn't drink, shaved without seeing his face, put on the same coat as if routine could undo intrusion. The phone rang again, this time from his bank branch. The manager's voice was polite, concerned, rehearsed. "Mr. Richard, We have a notarized change of beneficiaries from April. It lists your son as primary. We're just confirming." The words landed slow and heavy, like stones dropping through deep water. "I never filed that," he said. The manager hesitated. "It's scanned, signed, notarized. Send me a copy," Richard said. When it arrived by email, he stared at his own name printed in block letters. A perfect forgery. The signature was his, but wasn't it Hadisengel? His loop, his habit of pressing too hard at the end. But the stamp was wrong. The embossing didn't match the ink. "That stamp was copied," he murmured. The bank woman on the line lowered her voice. "We'll investigate. It'll freeze all accounts until verified." "Good," Richard said, his voice low, steady. "If there's a fire, I want the doors to stick." He hung up and sat there, listening to the hum of his quiet house, and thought about the black watch ticking somewhere else, measuring his ruin 1 second at a time. Richard had stopped the theft, but not the thief, because the hardest lock to change is the one that guards your trust. Richard stood in the bank lobby, the smell of disinfectant and old polish sharp in the air. Behind the counter, the assistant manager, a woman named Ria, smiled with the soft caution of someone trained to calm panic. "We have it here," she said, sliding a folder across the glass. Inside, his name sprawled across legal lines he'd never seen before. His signature, his hands twin-curved where it shouldn't. The notary's mark bled to dark, the circle pressed unevenly. "This isn't mine," he said quietly. Ria leaned in, her professional tone cracking into empathy. "It's a copy," she said, "but the original might still be archived. Give me 5 minutes." She disappeared behind a frosted door. He stood in the waiting silence, listening to the soft tick of the lobby clock, that slow reminder that time doesn't wait even when your life stops. When she returned, she held a paper to warn for a week-old record. The signature ink had sunk into the fibers. The notary stamp shadowed wrong 2 impressions instead of 1. "The ink's real," Ria said, "but the emboss is duplicate. Someone copied the press, not the seal." She looked up, eyes narrowed. "You should call the police again." Richard nodded but didn't move. He stared at the crooked stamp until the shape blurred, thinking how easily something false could pass for something trusted. On his way home, the world felt thinner. The kind of day when everything true seemed printed 1 shade too light. He stopped at a red light and caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes rimmed red. Jaw clenched, older than he remembered. The phone buzzed. A message from Evan. "Need help with the bank calls. I can join. Make it easier." The timing scraped against him like sandpaper. He typed back, "It's handled. There's a forged change of beneficiary. They're investigating." 3 blinking dots appeared, vanished, returned. "That's insane," Evan wrote. "Identity thefts everywhere these days." Then a pause. "Let me drive you there. We can sort it out together." Richard stared at the screen. The words sorted out together, twisting like wire. He typed, No need. I'll handle it. Then added, almost without thinking, how's the watch? The dots froze, then disappeared. After a long minute, a reply came. Still ticking. Richard set the phone down, the message echoing like a dare. When he got home, the house met him in silence, its walls neutral and polite. The kettle whistled too loud in the stillness. He poured tea, trying to pretend it was enough to anchor him. But every sound, the hum of the fridge, the soft click of the heat vents felt like the house was breathing someone else's air. Then the doorbell rang. 3 slow knocks. He opened it to find Lena standing there, holding a foil-covered dish. Behind her, Wayne and Mara hovered, concerned dressed in smiles. We were nearby, Wayne said, which was a lie. Thought you could use company. And dinner, Mara added softly, holding out the dish like peas in a pan. Richard let them in. Lena's eyes were tired, but her voice was gentle. He's been worried, you know. He should be, Richard said. The words came out sharper than he meant. Wayne laid a hand on the counter. Let's keep this civil. Family should stick together. Family should stop signing things for each other, Richard replied. The silence that followed was long enough to make the walls listen. Then Mara spoke softly. Don't let this become ugly. People start talking. Richard smiled without humor. They already are. He looked toward Lena, her eyes full of apologies she couldn't say. Tell him I'm done being managed, Richard said. And next time he should knock himself instead of sending messengers. The truth was closing in, but family never breaks quietly. By nightfall, Richard would learn that forgiveness can forge a signature too. The door clicked shut behind them, but their voices lingered like perfume thick, cloying, familiar. Richard stood in the kitchen, fingers tracing the rim of his mug, listening to the house exhale after company leaves. The lasagna they brought sat untouched on the counter, its foil reflecting fractured shapes of the light above. He poured his tea into the sink and watched it swirl down, darker than it should have been. Everything about the day felt like that ordinary things turned slightly wrong. The clock on the wall ticked like it was mocking him. He checked his phone. Nothing from the unknown number. Nothing from the police. Nothing from Evan. The silence was too deliberate. He sat at his desk again, reading the copy of the forged document. Each line, another nail, in something he hadn't agreed to build. The word trust repeated in his head until it stopped meaning anything. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt safe. In his own house, maybe before Nora's handwriting stopped showing up on notes around the kitchen. Maybe before his son learned how to smile through deceit. At 2:30, he drove to the branch listed on the forged notary record. The drive felt heavier this time, as if the car itself was tired of knowing. Inside, the bank was smaller, newer, but the air held the same artificial calm. When he asked for Bethany Cole, the notary's name, the clerk disappeared and came back with a young woman whose neat hair and worried eyes said she hadn't been at this long. Mr. Richer?" she asked. He handed her the copy of the forgery. She looked once and went pale. "That's not my signature," she said immediately. "That's my name, but that isn't my handwriting. I wasn't even here that week my mother was in the hospital." She put her hand to her mouth. "This has to be reported." "It will be," Richard said, his voice low but certain. "You'll send the report to number 2 RIA at the main branch." She nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said. "You didn't do this." As he walked back to his car, he realized his anger had cooled into something far sharper resolve. Whoever had done this had started to believe they were untouchable. That kind of confidence deserved to burn. By the time he got home, the daylight had thinned into a gray smear across the horizon. He parked behind the myrtle tree again. A ritual now, a place to think before facing whatever the house had waiting. The porch light flicked on automatically, the one thing still obeying him. Inside, his phone was already ringing. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "You saw the forgery," the voice said. It wasn't a question. "I did," Richard replied. "You knew about it." "I knew it was coming," the voice said calmly. "You have what you need now. But don't stop there. He'll push next for the paperwork, anything that ties your name to permission." "What kind of paperwork?" "Something Nora wrote," the voice said quietly. "Something he can twist." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "You knew her name," he whispered. "You said you weren't my problem." "And I'm not," the voice said. "But she trusted me once, enough to make sure you'd find what she left behind." The line clicked dead before Richard could ask what that meant. He stood in the half-light, phone still against his ear, the hum of the line fading into the creak of the house. The past Wasanti. Just haunting him, it was instructing him. Someone had forged his name, stolen his future, and whispered his wife's memory back into the game. Richard had no choice now but to open the drawer. Nora once told him never to forget. The air inside the office felt heavier than the rest of the house, like the walls knew what was coming. Richard stood in front of Nora's old desk, the one she'd refused to replace because, she said, memory hides best in wood. He pulled the top right drawer, the one that used to stick when she was alive, and this time it slid out smooth, quiet, almost expectant. Inside were pens, old envelopes, a roll of tape, and tucked beneath them, a small blue index card with one word in her careful print. Larkspur. His breath caught. It wasn't just a flower to her, it had been their code word, a promise for when life got too loud. Beneath the card lay a thin folder marked the same. He opened it standing up, afraid that sitting might make it too real. The first page was in her handwriting. Crisp, deliberate. "If you're reading this, we've misplaced a plan." The words hit like a soft knife. Nora had written instructions, guardianship, property, boundaries, and at the bottom, a line that made his hands tremble. "If anyone proposes a trust with your initials that you did not make with our attorney, burn the paper and call her." He turned the page, found a square of paper glued to the last sheet. He pried it loose carefully. Beneath was a tiny memory card, no bigger than his thumbnail. On the back, she'd written, "Voicemail, save me from myself." He sat down slowly, slotting the card into a reader, his pulse matching the computer's hum. "A single file appear Nora, VM02 Aje clicked it. The room filled with her voice, thinner than he remembered but warm enough to cut through the cold. "Hey, handsome," she began softly, a laugh threading through the ache. "I'm leaving this now because I know myself. Tomorrow, I'll pretend everything's fine. Next week, I'll call it normal. But you have to promise me no signing, no changes, no peace that requires silence. I love them, but loving doesn't mean they get the pen. Move the bowl from the door. Enrich her. Drink water. Eat something that isn't guilt. Larkspur." The message ended with a breath she tried to turn into a laugh. He sat there, staring at the screen, hearing her voice loop in his head like a lullaby that had outlived its purpose. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted, it felt protected. Then came the knock. One single knock. Deliberate, almost polite. He killed the audio, stood and walked to the door. Lena stood there, hair unwashed, jacket too thin for the weather, her eyes caught between fear and apology. "I'm not staying," she said, lifting a small pie box. "Peace offering." Richard stepped aside silently, letting her in. In the office she saw the open drawer, the papers, the screen still glowing faintly with Nora's message. "You found something," she said softly. "I found her," he replied. He handed her the letter. She read it without touching the page, eyes tracing every word. When she reached the line about peace, her lips pressed tight. "He says that," she whispered. "He says it every time he wants a subject to die quietly." Her hands shook, not from cold but from recognition. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Rich's voice was steady now. "Get the truth before 5. She nodded, tears caught at the edge of her lashes. "Then we'll watch the kids tonight. If anyone shows up, I'll keep the pie between them and the door." She left as quietly as she'd arrived, her car disappearing down the street like a decision already made. The house exhaled again, slower this time, as if Wade and Richard finally had proof of who forged the paper, but the past had left him one more test. Before the sun set, he'd learned that the truth doesn't just expose it, invites the final knock. The world had turned the color of old steel by the time Richard stepped out again. He locked the door behind him, though the gesture felt almost ceremonial, like guarding a place that no longer belonged to him. The folder with Nora's handwriting rested under his arm. Her words echoed in his head with every step. "If peace demands silence, it isn't peace." The HOA office light glowed dull yellow through the blinds when he arrived. Kathy was there again, sipping her lukewarm coffee and pretending not to notice the weight he carried in his hands. "You came back," she said quietly. "I need the raw footage," he replied. "Maple And third, full of metadata intact. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "You never sat here," she murmured, sliding the monitor toward him. Together they scrubbed through the timeline, the minutes ticking like a countdown. Then 7:27. The frame froze on a figure crossing the sidewalk, hood drawn, shoulders hunched. As the hood shifted in the wind, the light caught a jawline, clean and familiar, a shape that once laughed across the same dinner tables now filled with suspicion. Richard didn't speak. The truth didn't need sound, it already had a face. Kathy's voice was barely a whisper. "You want the copy?" "The whole hour," he said, uncut. She nodded, transferring the data to a small drive and placing it in his palm like a relic. "Be careful," she said softly. He nodded once, slipped it into his coat, and walked out into the evening. The unknown number called before he even reached the car. He answered on the first ring. "You've got it," the voice said. "Good. Don't share it yet." "Someone who knows how these stories end," the man replied. "He's going to try and get ahead of you, Pentu. As lost, paranoid, confused, you have something that makes him small. Don't let him speak first." The call ended, leaving only the hum of the wind against the phone. Richard's reflection glimmered faintly in the car, window eyes hollow, jaw set, resolve steady. He drove to the church because he knew that's where Evan would go next. Sunday mornings had always been his stage, his place for sincerity that sounded like leadership. The parking lot was full. Families filtering through the doors with paper cups of coffee and clean smiles. Inside, the foyer was warm and bright and smelled of peppermint and polished wood. Evan saw him first. Lena trailed behind, eyes already asking for calm. Wayne and Mara hovered like witnesses pretending they weren't. "Dad," Evan said, voice tuned for sympathy. "We need to talk." "Then talk," Richard said, stepping closer so everyone could hear. "About the house, the footage, or the forgery." A ripple passed through. A ripple passed through. Evan lifted his hands like a man performing grace. "You're confused," he said softly. "You're tired. There's been a misunderstanding." Richard reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the small USB drive, and held it up. "At 7:27, he said, you weren't home. You were at my door." Evan's expression didn't crack. Immediately it took a breath, a flicker before the warmth drained from his eyes. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't be doing this here," he hissed. "People are watching." "That's the point," Richard said. "Truth doesn't hide behind doors anymore." Evan glanced at Lena, at the onlookers, then smiled. A smile meant to wound softly. "Dad," he said, "I love you. We all want peace." Richard laughed once, quiet but sharp. "That word doesn't mean what you think it does." He placed the drive on the foyer table, next to the bulletins and donation envelopes. "Police already have a copy," he said. "This one's for me." For the first time, his son's mask slipped his face pale, the silver notch of his watch catching the light like a confession. Richard turned and walked toward the door, the crowd parting without a sound. Outside, the wind cut through the air, clean and final. He breathed in once, deep and steady. The unknown number buzzed again. He answered. "It's done," the voice said. "He won't come back." "Who are you?" Richard asked one last time. A pause, then a faint chuckle. "Just someone Nora trusted to finish what she couldn't." The line went dead for good. Back home, the house waited in silence. He set Nora's letter on the kitchen table beside the empty bowl that had started everything. For a long time, he just stood there, letting the quiet settle, feeling the weight of endings that didn't sound like closure but like exhale. Outside, the patrol car passed one last time, its lights low, its purpose complete. Richard turned off every lamp except one, the small one by the window, the one that made the house look lived in from the street. He poured himself a glass of water and sat beside the letter. The night felt colder, but lighter too, as if the truth had finally made enough space to breathe. He whispered the word under his breath, around the house. For the first time in months, didn't feel like it was listening. It simply rested. The story began with a call from an unknown voice and ended with Richard realizing that sometimes the only way to find peace is to stop letting silence define it. If you were watching this, remember, truth doesn't knock. It waits for you to open the door. If you liked this story, make sure to subscribe to Richard's Stories, where every truth has a shadow, and every shadow has a story.